I want to express my deep appreciation for the recent unveiling of the historic landmark for George B. Vashon. Now, of course, you know George B. Vashon was a very prominent Pittsburgh citizen, and he was a very good friend of Martin Delany, of which you know I'm so obsessed in his history and his association with the black people of America and Pittsburgh, and that they were really good friends. Now, before I wrote my play about Martin Delany, I wrote a play about a guy named Robert Smalls. Now, Robert Smalls was a slave born in 1839 in Beaufort, South Carolina. And by the time the Civil War came about, at Charleston Harbor, where he was sent to work, he wound up a pilot of sailing ships and steamships. And so, when the Civil War erupted, the Confederates had Robert piloting a general's flagship, a ship known as the CSS Planter. Now, Robert at that time was the absolute best pilot in the Sea Islands. And Robert, he knew all the shoals and reefs involved. And so, they had him piloting the CSS Planter. And during that time, at Charleston Harbor, the military was so lax in securing the ships that a lot of times they would leave the slaves on board the ships, not concerned at all that they would do anything. So, noticing this pattern, Robert and his crew members, they had plotted to take the Planter and turn it over to the Union blockaders, which were just 7 miles off the coast of South Carolina. If he could just make it 7 miles out there, he and his crew and their families would be free. You see, because earlier, put their family on this island, Morris Island, and they would wait, and if they could just get past the sentry post, past Fort Sumter, and the thing was, in order to get past those forts, you had to know the signal to blow on the ship's whistle, and it was different for each fort. So, Robert, being the expert pilot that he was and used to going past these posts, these forts daily, they plotted to take the ship in the dead of night. Robert Smalls dressed up in the Confederate captain's uniform and kept the wide brim hat just down low, and it's the middle of the night, so as they were going to these posts, he would give the signal and they'd say, "Pass the Planter," and they actually made it. They picked up their family and they made it out to the Union blockaders. They put up a bed sheet as a flag of surrender, and the USS Onward and the commander of that ship, Captain Nichols, had boarded the Planter only to find Robert Smalls in the uniform of a captain. Confederate captain. Anyway, they gave Robert Smalls a bounty of $1,500 for delivering this ship that was fully supplied with cannons, rifles, molasses, whiskey, dried beef, you name it, it was on that ship. And so, I said all that to say that in 1863, here in Pittsburgh, there were threats that Confederate guerrillas were going to come up the rivers and attack Pittsburgh. There were fortifications put up along the Ohio, along the Monongahela, and along the Allegheny. Now, of those forts that were along the Monongahela, one of those forts was built by 230 black men. They were all coordinated by George B. Vashon. After it was completed, George B. Vashon insisted that the fort be named Fort Robert Smalls. Through my digging, I come to find out that this fort was built on McGuire's Hill, which became modern-day Arlington Heights. In this edition of the Pittsburgh Gazette-Times dated Sunday, July 1st, 1923, the details of the building of Fort Robert Smalls are as follows. Work on new position. On this day, a new hill was reported being fortified, McGuire's, wherever that is. The workmen here numbered 230, and all were Negroes, men not yet citizens. This fort was subsequently given the name Fort Smalls at the request of George B. Vashon, a noted educator of his race, and it commemorated the heroism of Robert Smalls, a slave pilot who boldly piloted a Confederate steamer out of Beaufort Harbor, South Carolina, and into the midst of the Union fleet blockading that part. Smalls, after the war, served several terms in Congress. This was during the period known as Reconstruction days. Throughout the war, Smalls was exceedingly useful to the Union Navy and was constantly employed as a pilot. His achievements obtained him wide fame in the North, and the naming of a fort in the Pittsburgh chain of defenses, and one built by men of his color, seemed both just and fitting. Vashon was a very light mulatto, an exceedingly good scholar, and one of the faculty of Avery College for Negroes in Allegheny. And that occurred to me because I grew up in St. Clair Village. Now, as I was growing up, I was always over in Arlington Heights. In fact, I used to go to day camp and swimming in Arlington Heights at this recreational playground called the Fort. And it was up there on Fort Hill Street, right there in Arlington Heights. So I'm like, wow, that's it. But after I kept digging, come to find out that it was not Fort Robert Smalls, that it was either Fort Laughlin or Fort McKinley or Fort McKnight. One of those. I'm still in search of Fort Robert Smalls. So, doing some more digging, I came to find newspaper clippings. Check these out. City digging for history of Civil War era dirt forts. There's number 10, Fort Smalls, number 12, Fort McKinley, and number 14, Fort McKnight. In Grandview Park, near the top of William Street, was Fort McKnight, number 14, and Fort McKinley, number 12, was the site of Arlington Playground. It was also called Fort Laughlin because of the workmen from Laughlin and Company steel mill had built it. Another case of confusion on names was on McGuire's Hill, near St. Peter's Cemetery at the end of Devlin Street. The proper name of this redoubt was Fort Smalls. Number 10, named for Robert Smalls, a Philadelphia Negro. It was built entirely by Negro labor. And here's another newspaper clipping from the Pittsburgh Press from February 14th, 1929. There's this article on the front page talking about Fort Robert Smalls. Check this out. Residents erected defense against feared visit of Morgan's Raiders by Marie McSwiggan. Two old forts once served to still the alarm of early residents of what is now Arlington Heights who dreaded the coming of the rebels to these parts. The site of Arlington Playgrounds once knew a set of breastworks raised in the defense of the citizens and in the preservation of the Union. Likewise, a part of another fort, Nigger Fort, is still standing farther out Arlington Avenue near St. Peter's Cemetery and beyond 30th Street. The first, McKinley Fort, was left standing as late as 5 years ago. It was a structure of mud, but it outlasted sturdier buildings. When the city purchased the ground for Arlington Playground 15 years or so ago, it was decided to leave the old fort standing, according to Fred F. Dangler, city property assessor, who was the chief instrument in getting the playground for the kiddies. Indeed, old Nigger Fort is still standing, or part of it for anyone to see, said Fred F. Dangler, often referred to as the mayor of the district. Now, at first, I gotta admit, I got pretty ticked off when I read that. I was pretty mad. But as a historian, I couldn't ask for better verification that that was where Fort Robert Smalls once stood. So, in both articles, they talk about preservation. check this out. From that same July 1st, 1923 article of the Pittsburgh Gazette, the works have not been suffered to remain as proud monuments of Pittsburgh's patriotism and public spirit. Perhaps it is within the province of some of our historical societies to take suitable action to awaken public interest and mark the spots where the principal fort stood. It is feasible for those interested to make pilgrimages in good weather to the few that remain, at least to some of the best known and most easily accessible locations, with speakers appointed for each occasion. These could procure all the data and arrange this matter in permanent historical form. And going back to that front page Pittsburgh Press article from February 14th, 1929, what will become of it, nobody knows. So far, no historic society has taken over its preservation. Okay, there you have it. Both articles, which were 6 years apart. This first one was from July 1st, 1923, and the one with good old Fred F. Dangler from 1929. They both saw that these installations, these fortifications, were significant to our city's history and our city's part in the Civil War. So what are we going to do to preserve them? It said that there should be speakers. Here you go, right here. I think it's something that the mayor's office, city council, could have some interest in. And if you do, George B. Vashon was a member of the St. Cyprian Alpha 13 Prince Hall Masons Lodge, of which I am a member. And those guys that I was with on Juneteenth, those were my brothers from that lodge. So if anything is to be done about it, in celebration, in commemoration, we'd like to be involved. All right, thank you for listening. Take care, buddy.